Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to look at some of the most extreme tornado events in Texas state history. Now, Texas is no stranger to severe weather and tornadoes, but some of these events have really left a lasting legacy on the state of Texas and the people that call Texas home. I wanted to take a look here at the top 5 worst tornadoes in state history and look at a little bit of the images and really the events and what made them so extreme. So join me here in this video as we discuss. Now, a couple of the criteria that need to be considered with any type of a video or breakdown like this is that this truly is a subjective assessment. There's not an objective way to say that, one tornado was significantly worse than the other. These are all really bad events in the state of Texas here. And so a couple of the criteria that I looked at was what was the official rating from the National Weather Service? What was details like the path length? How long was this tornado on the ground? What was the extent of the damage on where this tornado struck? And then what were the number of deaths and injuries that this tornado inflicted on the area that it hit? So these are all the criteria that I considered in this breakdown and in these ratings, but certainly welcome to feedback if you think there are other criteria that could have been considered, or maybe even a tornado that should have been on the list that didn't quite make it. I think that makes the discussion and feedback very important. So one of the things that we want to look at is that Texas obviously is a big state. It's had a lot of tornadoes. This right here looks at all of the tornadoes that are available on records dating back to the 1600s. Probably a lot of tornadoes were missed further back, not as much reporting, probably, not quite the population either. But on the records, we have over 9,700 tornadoes that have struck the state of Texas. Sadly, they've killed over 2,000 Texans and injured almost 18,000 more. So this gives us a little bit of an idea of just how many tornadoes strike Texas. Obviously, a lot of area. Texas is a big state, but also have had some pretty significant tornadoes. So now let's look at the top 5 worst tornadoes to ever strike the state of Texas. Coming in here at number 5, we have the Rock Springs tornado of April 12th, 1927. Now, this tornado, it was officially rated an F5 tornado by the National Weather Service. Its official path length was 36.4 miles. Its maximum width was about 1,600 yards. It sadly killed 74 people and injured another 205 people. So this tornado was extremely destructive. We can see one of the news headlines here as the survivors try to rebuild, and also a photo of the really significant damage that was inflicted on the town of Rock Springs back in 1927. One of the interesting facts about this tornado was that of the 245 buildings in the town of Rock Springs, 235, so only 10 buildings, were not destroyed from the tornado. And about 1/3 of the population of Rock Springs was sadly killed in the tornado. So very destructive tornado. Not a whole lot of information given how far ago it was. It's very possible that if there was more information, maybe if this were to occur, a little bit, sooner to where we are today, it's possible it might even be higher in the rankings. But very significant tornado here. Coming in at number 4 is the Wichita Falls April 10th, 1979 tornado. Now, this tornado was significant in and of itself, even though the rating was only an F4 by the National Weather Service. The reason that this tornado really made the list was that it was part of what's been labeled Terrible Tuesday, and there were over 13 tornadoes in Northwest Texas and Southwest Oklahoma on this specific day. And so a significant event, although this is likely the worst and certainly the worst damage of a tornado from that day. So again, rated an F4. Its path length was a little over 47 miles, maximum width over 1,300 yards. It did sadly kill 42 people, and it injured a little over 1,700 more. So pretty significant event here. Some of the images that are available from this tornado are pretty stark when you see just the size and really just the impact and how kind of scary a picture that this tornado presented if you happen to be someone that was looking upon it. So one of the interesting things about this tornado, I don't have an image here, but there was at times where it was a multi-vortex tornado to where you could see multiple different circulations rotating around the actual updraft of the parent circulation. So very significant event here. Really went through a lot of the residential area of kind of southwest Wichita Falls, and really inflicted a lot of damage. So that's why this tornado makes it on number 4 on the countdown. Now, number 3 on the countdown of the 5 worst tornadoes in Texas history, we have the Lubbock tornado of May 11th, 1970. Now, this tornado was rated an F5 by the National Weather Service, only a path length of 8.4 miles. The path width was a little over 1,300 yards, sadly killing 26 people and injuring 500 more. Now, one of the interesting things about this tornado was that the father of tornado research, Dr. Ted Fujita, he actually was on the ground and studied extensively not only the path of this tornado but the damage that it inflicted on the town of Lubbock. And so we can see this kind of schematic that Dr. Fujita put together after the event and looked at. There were actually 2 different tornadoes, and they also tended to be a little bit kind of irregular in their movements. The second tornado that really hit most of Lubbock actually did a couple kind of loops and curly cues, which is not necessarily typical, not unheard of, but certainly not typical of a tornado or a violent tornado like this F5 that hit Lubbock back in 1970. So some of the damage here, very extensive damage across really the heart of much of Lubbock, and certainly a very destructive and well-remembered tornado here in an event. Now, number 2 on the countdown of the top 5 worst tornadoes of Texas history is the Waco, Texas tornado of May 11th, 1953. Now, this tornado was very, very extensive, rated an F5 by the National Weather Service, had a path length of a little over 20 miles, path width not as large as some of the others, only about 583 yards wide, but it did kill 114 people and injured almost 1,600. This tornado was and still is the most deadly tornado to strike the state of Texas, killing that 114 people. So it really made a beeline right through much of really the downtown and the heart of the Waco, Texas area. And we can see some of the extensive damage here of the crumbled buildings, cars being just folded up like a tin can, and really the extensive damage, especially around downtown. You can see the metal, the wood, these buildings just completely collapsed from the impact of the tornado really coming through downtown. So certainly a very significant tornado here. And now we get to the number 1 tornado on the countdown of the 5 worst tornadoes here to strike the state of Texas, and that is the Gerald, Texas tornado of May 27th, 1997. Now, this tornado, if you've followed tornadoes, if you're someone that loves tornado history, state of Texas history, you may have been able to guess that this was the number 1 tornado on the countdown. This tornado was extensive in the damage and the impact that it caused on the town of Gerald, and some of not only the damage indicators, but just the studies that have been done afterwards show that this is very possibly one of the strongest tornadoes really anywhere in the world in recorded history. So looking a little bit at the details of this tornado, this was rated officially an F5 by the National Weather Service. Path length, relatively short, only 7.5 miles, only a path width of about 650 yards. It did sadly kill 27 people and injured 12 others. Now, you might be asking, okay, well, not that long of a tornado, not a very wide path, only killed 27 people, only injured 12. How could you consider this number 1? Really what it comes down to is just the extent of the damage and destruction and death that it caused right where it hit. And when we look at some of the images here, you can see just how really intimidating and scary of a tornado this was during the event, and just how black, how strong it was. And in this next image, I think this is one of the most well-known images of tornadoes and just tornado history. It's the dead man walking view of the tornado. Now, what you can see in this image is really just a couple different suction vortices that are coming down in the tornado, but you can kind of see the legs of what's called the dead man walking, and some of the kind of history and folklore kind of said that if you were about to see death, you would see this dead man walking. And so that's why this image, I think, has really gone down in history and been so memorable overall. And certainly when we look at just the destruction of where this tornado hit, the tornado really slowed down. And this image right here is over the Double Creek subdivision outside of Gerald. And this tornado really slowed down, and it really just sat over the same area for an extensive amount of time and almost just ground everything it struck into almost just nothing left. It was hard for people to identify the bodies. They sadly had to piece a lot of the bodies together. And as you can see in this image, typically even the destructive tornadoes, they might wipe a foundation clean, but there's going to be a pile of debris, typically kind of to the side or in the field next to it. And in the Gerald tornado, a lot of the debris was just nowhere to be found. Most of the cars in the subdivision here in Double Creek were found at least a quarter of a mile away from where they actually were when the tornado struck. So something as big of a car being swept, a quarter mile away, that's some significant destruction and wind speeds that's going to be needed to see something like that happen. The other thing that was important about this event is that sadly, no matter what these people did, the only known survivors in the Double Creek subdivision was a family that actually got in their car and drove away right before the tornado hit, or it was a family and their neighbors that were actually underground in their storm shelter. Sadly, there were families and people that did everything right in this tornado. They were in that innermost room, they took shelter, they were in the bathtub. And sadly, just the absolute power of this tornado, unless you were underground or out of the way, it just wasn't a survivable event. So that, I think, goes to show it just a little bit of the absolute insane power of this tornado. So certainly Gerald, Texas is something to be remembered. And really that's the countdown of the top 5 worst tornadoes to ever strike the Lone Star State. Certainly would love feedback and comments. Is there a tornado maybe that should have made the list that didn't? An event maybe that you think is maybe not as well respected as it should have been. I think that's what makes these countdowns pretty fun, is that certainly there's that subjectivity and some of that open debate. So love to hear in the comments if you found this video insightful. Is there some other breakdown or another countdown that would be interesting to you, or maybe some debate on a tornado that either shouldn't have made the list or maybe was left off and should have been included? So thanks for watching, and see you again next time.